Hi, and welcome to ThreatTraq Essentials. I'm here this week with Matt Kaiser. How are you, Matt?
Doing all right, Don. How about yourself?
Great. Let's talk about some of the stories you guys covered this week on ThreatTraq. The first one you brought to us was about several bugs in Intel processors. Tell me about that.
Sure thing. So a couple of bugs were reported by SentinelOne and Positive Technologies, all having to do with Intel processors of varying types. Two of them are privilege escalation bugs, which means that you can use this bug to gain elevated privileges on running code in that processor. I think it has to do with the system management mode, which is a mode of those processors. And the other one has to do with a physical attack, which apparently would allow you to recover a master key that's burned into these processors at the physical fuse level, so that you can take that key and use it to decrypt things relating to the the TPM chip, which is like a trusted module within the processor, and a bunch of other things you can do with that information as well.
So for those who are vulnerable to this type of attack, how do they protect themselves?
Well, the patches are already available from Intel, so I'm guessing each OEM, equipment manufacturer, is going to have to send out patches for it. So keep yourself up to date with your patches, and you should be, taken care of pretty well. There are some systems that are older that are affected by one of the bugs. I think it's like a core, I guess something from years ago. This doesn't just affect new processors, is what I'm trying to say. So if you do have machines at home, in general, this might be a time to dig out the one you haven't turned on in a couple of years and just make sure its patches are up to date.
Good idea. Let's talk about the story Chris told us about, which is about a surge in HTML phishing attacks.
That's right. So this was an article that Microsoft had put out talking about these HTML smuggling attacks, which is a way of hiding the actual payloads of your phishing attempt in an HTML attachment to an email. This is interesting because it's being used in the targeted Nobelium attacks, which have been widely reported, I believe, to be a nation-state actor. So this is a write-up about the phishing procedures that they use, and also a little bit about the HTML smuggling technique.
And again, how do you protect yourself against attacks like this?
So most of the folks who have been following our advice on how to spot phishing attacks will probably be pretty okay with this. I would recommend that if you see a .html attachment in an email that you consider it potentially malicious. It's something that I don't see very often in the wild as a legitimate attachment type. There are a few other things you can do that this article goes into, some changes you can make to the operating system. For example, .js and .jse files should not be opened by default as something to be run, but should be treated as like a plain text file instead. So I recommend if you are someone who might be targeted in one of these attacks, and if you're following Nobelium and you're aware of the group, you've already identified this for yourself, take a look at the technical stuff inside of this article and see if you can make any of the changes to your environment.
And really, any unexpected attachment you should never open. You should always be suspicious of it.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about Jim's story. That was about ABC Bot, the DDoS that's targeting Linux servers.
That's right. So this is a DDoS bot that's kind of interesting, has a few little unique techniques that it likes to do. It seems to be spreading itself mostly through weak credentials. That is, it's trying to connect to a bunch of known services with default passwords. And then it also, I believe, has a exploit for a WebLogic bug. It seems to be targeting Huawei cloud servers in particular for some reason. The code is under active development, and Jim walked through some of the updates that have been made in the recent time. So, for example, when the code first came out, there was a module there marked for DGA, but it hadn't been implemented. Since then, it has actually been implemented as a domain generation algorithm. And this one, not only it uses Tor for C2, then it can fall back to a DGA generated domain. And if that fails, it can fall back to a randomly generated or pseudo-randomly generated GitHub account to find its command and control. So there's a lot of interesting stuff that it's doing. And if you're this kind of person who likes to dig into malware, I recommend you take a look at the article.
And that'll tell you ways to mitigate this type of threat.
It'll tell you ways to identify this as the threat that it is, and there's probably a few things you can do on your side as a network defender to keep this thing out. Basically, if you've got default credentials on any of your internet-facing ports, that's something you can fix very quickly. Make sure your WebLogic servers are patched, as well as if you think you might also be infected, take a look at your logs, see if any of the known DGA domains show up. There's a couple of domains in particular that this malware seems to like to use, and if you take a look at your logs, those should stick out like a sore thumb.
Well, thank you, Matt, and thank you all for watching. If you want to keep up on great stories like this every week, like and subscribe below. And if you want to take a deeper dive into any of these stories, just click on them and watch them in their entirety. And we'll see you next time.